She looked at the paralyzed billionaire and said one sentence that made him question everything he thought he knew. He was left alone at the table, again. The untouched glass of water, the second chair still pulled out, the silence louder than any rejection. People glanced, then looked away. A billionaire with everything, except the one thing he couldn't buy: dignity. Then a small voice broke through it all. A little girl stepped closer, her eyes calm, almost certain. She said something no one had ever dared to say to him. And in that moment, everything changed. The city stretched out beneath the rooftop like a sea of lights, flickering gold and white against the deep blue of a Chicago night. Traffic hummed far below, a steady rhythm that felt distant, almost unreal from this height. Soft jazz drifted through the air, blending with the quiet clinking of glasses and silverware. Everything about the place whispered elegance: crisp white tablecloths, candlelight glowing in glass holders, waiters moving like shadows between tables. At the center of it all, Daniel Brooks sat alone. He had arrived early, 15 minutes early, to be exact. That was his habit: precision, control, never giving chance an opportunity to embarrass him. His suit was perfectly tailored, a deep charcoal that contrasted sharply with the polished chrome of his wheelchair. His hands rested calmly on the armrests, though the slight tension in his fingers betrayed him. He had checked his reflection twice before coming up the elevator, adjusted his tie, smoothed his hair, practiced the version of himself that people used to admire before everything changed, before the accident. While the hostess had hesitated for just a fraction of a second when she saw him. It was subtle, almost invisible, but Daniel had learned to recognize it. That flicker of surprise, that quick mental recalculation. Then the smile, professional and polite, carefully arranged to hide the discomfort. "Right this way, sir." He had followed her across the restaurant, wheels gliding quietly over polished stone, aware of the way conversations dipped ever so slightly as he passed. Not stopped, never obvious, but shifted, adjusted. Not for the first time, he wondered if people noticed how loud silence could be. Now he sat at the table, a glass of water untouched in front of him, watching the elevator doors across the rooftop entrance. She was late. 5 minutes, then 10. Daniel checked his watch, though he already knew the time. His jaw tightened slightly, but he kept his posture relaxed, calm, in control. That was the version of himself the world still expected. And then, finally, the elevator doors opened. She stepped out, tall, elegant, a navy dress that caught the light just enough to draw attention without trying too hard. She scanned the room quickly, her eyes moving from table to table until they landed on him. For a brief moment, her expression lit up. Recognition. Relief. Then it changed. Daniel saw it happen in real time. Her gaze dropped, not to his face but lower, to the wheelchair. And everything shifted. It wasn't dramatic. There was no gasp, no sharp intake of breath. Just a quiet, almost imperceptible stiffening of her shoulders, a hesitation in her step. But Daniel felt it like a physical blow. She approached the table slowly, her smile no longer effortless. "Daniel?" she said, her voice careful now, measured. He nodded, offering a warm, practiced smile. "Hi, I'm glad you made it." She sat down, but not fully, just perched on the edge of the chair, as if unsure whether she planned to stay. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The jazz music seemed louder now. The murmur of other conversations pressed in from all sides. Daniel could feel the weight of the moment stretching, thinning, ready to snap. "I didn't know," she said finally. There it was. Daniel kept his expression steady. It didn't come up. That was true. He hadn't hidden it. But he hadn't led with it either. He had learned that people preferred to decide who you were before they saw what you had become. She looked down at her hands, then back at him, her discomfort no longer masked. She exhaled sharply, shaking her head. I didn't sign up for this. The words landed harder than he expected. Not cruel, not shouted, just honest, and somehow that made it worse. Daniel felt something tighten in his chest, but he didn't let it show. Years of boardrooms, negotiations, and public appearances had taught him how to hold a mask, even when everything inside him fractured. I understand, he said quietly. She stood up, too quickly. The chair scraped softly against the floor, drawing a few glances from nearby tables. She hesitated for half a second, as if considering whether to say something else. An apology, maybe. But she didn't. I'm sorry, she muttered, though her tone carried more discomfort than regret. Then she turned and walked away. Just like that. No scene, no drama, just absence. While Daniel sat there, his hands still resting on the armrests, his posture unchanged. If anyone had glanced over, they might have thought nothing had happened. But everything had. Around him, the restaurant continued as if nothing had shifted. Laughter rose from a table nearby. A waiter passed with a tray of drinks. Someone clinked a glass in a toast. Life moved forward. Just not for him. For a moment, Daniel allowed himself to breathe in the silence she left behind. It wrapped around him, heavy and suffocating. Not empty, no, never empty. Full. Full of every look he had ever received since the accident. Full of every conversation that changed the moment people realized. Full of every opportunity that quietly slipped away. He reached for his glass of water, then stopped halfway. His hand trembled slightly, and he lowered it again. Across the rooftop, he caught a glimpse of her disappearing into the elevator. The doors closed, sealing her away, taking whatever possibility this night had held with it. A waiter approached cautiously. Sir, would you like to order? Daniel looked up at him, his expression calm, almost serene. No, he said. The waiter nodded, unsure, then stepped away. And just like that, Daniel Brooks, one of the most powerful men in the city, sat alone in a place designed for connection, surrounded by people who would never truly see him. The candle on his table flickered softly, its flame bending under a passing breeze. Shadows danced across the white tablecloth, shifting and reforming, never settling. Daniel stared at it for a long time. He had built companies from nothing, turned risks into empires, had controlled outcomes in rooms filled with men who underestimated him. But this was something he couldn't negotiate, couldn't fix, couldn't outthink. For the first time in a long time, he felt something dangerously close to defeat. Not the kind that shows up in numbers or contracts, the kind that settles quietly in your chest and whispers that maybe you're no longer someone the world wants to choose. A burst of laughter from a nearby table cut through the moment. Daniel blinked slowly, pulling himself back. Control. Always control. He straightened slightly, adjusting his jacket with precise, deliberate movements. If anyone looked at him now, they would see a man composed, unshaken. But inside, something had cracked, and it didn't feel like it would be easy to repair. The wind picked up, carrying the distant sound of sirens from somewhere deep in the city below. Life continuing, always continuing. Daniel turned his gaze toward the edge of the rooftop, toward the vast expanse of Chicago stretching out before him. So many people, so many lives. And yet, in this moment, he had never felt more invisible. He didn't notice the small figure standing near the entrance downstairs. He didn't see the little girl tugging gently at her mother's hand, pointing up toward the rooftop, her curious eyes fixed on the man sitting alone under the candlelight. He didn't hear her question. "Mom, why is he sitting there all by himself?" Because if he had, maybe this night wouldn't have ended in silence after all. Down on the street, the cold air carried the smell of rain and exhaust. The city felt different at ground level, louder, rougher, more honest. Neon signs flickered above storefronts, and the hum of traffic pressed in from every direction. It was a world far removed from the quiet elegance of the rooftop above. Aisha Carter pulled her coat tighter around herself as she stepped out of the side entrance of the restaurant. Her shift had just ended. Her feet ached, her back throbbed, and there was still another job waiting for her in a few hours. But for now, she had one small piece of comfort, her daughter's hand wrapped tightly in hers. Lila skipped beside her, her sneakers splashing lightly through shallow puddles left behind by an earlier drizzle. She hummed to herself, something soft and out of tune, the kind of melody only children could carry without embarrassment. "Mom," Lila said suddenly, slowing down. Aisha glanced down, already tired but patient. "Oh, yeah, baby?" Lila wasn't looking at her. She was staring up, past the streetlights, past the glass windows, toward the rooftop where the restaurant glowed like a distant world. Why is that man sitting all by himself? Aisha followed her gaze. At first, she didn't see him. Just the soft glow of candles, silhouettes moving behind glass, the faint reflection of wealth and comfort she rarely touched. But then her eyes adjusted. There, a single figure at a table, still, alone. Aisha hesitated. She had learned over time not to get involved in things that weren't hers. Life had a way of punishing people who stepped out of their lane, especially people like her. "Maybe he's waiting for someone," she said quietly, already tugging Lila's hand to keep moving. But Lila didn't move. "He doesn't look like he's waiting," she said. Oh, there was something in the way she said it. Simple, honest, without judgment, that made Aisha stop. Aisha looked again, and this time she saw more than just a man at a table. She saw the way his shoulders were set, too still, the way his hands rested, unmoving, the space around him that no one dared to fill. She recognized that kind of loneliness, not the kind that comes from being alone, the kind that comes from being unseen. Aisha exhaled slowly. "Come on," she said softly. But instead of pulling Lila away, she turned back toward the service entrance. Lila's eyes lit up. "Where are we going?" Aisha didn't answer right away. Inside, the kitchen was nearly empty now. The noise had died down, replaced by the clatter of cleanup and the low hum of machines being shut off. The smell of cooked meat and spices lingered in the air. Aisha moved quickly, grabbing a small container from the counter. Leftovers. Nothing fancy, just food that would have been thrown away in another hour. One of the kitchen staff looked up. "You taking that?" Aisha shrugged. "Better than it going to waste." He nodded, already turning back to his work. Lila watched closely as Aisha packed the food, her small face full of quiet anticipation. "Is it for him?" she whispered. Aisha paused for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah," she said. "It is." They made their way back outside, the night air sharper now against their skin. The elevator that led up to the rooftop stood just inside the glass doors, guarded by a hostess who looked far too polished for this part of the building. Aisha hesitated again. This wasn't her world. It never had been. People like her didn't go up there. It's not unless they were working. Not unless they were invisible. "Mom?" Lila said softly. Aisha looked down at her daughter. Those eyes. Curious. Open. Unafraid. Everything Aisha had once been before the world taught her to shrink. She straightened her shoulders. "Stay close to me," she said. The hostess glanced up as they approached, her expression flickering briefly with confusion. "Can I help you?" she asked. Aisha held up the container. "Just bringing something up for a guest." The hostess hesitated, her eyes moving quickly over Aisha's worn coat, then to Lila, then back again. Another calculation, another silent judgment. But this time, Aisha didn't look away. After a second, the hostess stepped aside. "Go ahead." The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. As they stepped inside, Lila squeezed her mother's hand a little tighter. The ride up was quiet. Too quiet. Aisha could feel her heartbeat in her chest, steady but heavy. This wasn't fear exactly. It was something deeper, something older. The feeling of stepping into a space that had never been meant for you. When the doors opened, the rooftop greeted them with warmth and light. The contrast was almost jarring. Conversations continued. Glasses clinked. No one stopped to stare outright, but Aisha could feel it. The subtle shift, the awareness of something out of place. She ignored it. Her focus was locked on one table, on one man. Daniel hadn't moved. He sat exactly where they had seen him from below, the candlelight flickering softly across his face. Up close, he looked older than she expected. Not weak, but tired in a way that had nothing to do with the body. He didn't notice them at first. Aisha approached slowly, her steps careful, deliberate. "Excuse me," she said gently. Daniel looked up. For a split second, confusion crossed his face. Then something else. Surprise. Aisha held out the container. "I figured you might be hungry," she said. No explanation, no apology, just offering. Daniel stared at her, then at the container, then back at her again. His eyes lingered, not on her clothes, not on where she came from, but on her face, trying to understand. "Why?" he asked quietly. It wasn't suspicion. It was something closer to disbelief. Aisha shrugged slightly. "Because you're sitting here alone." Simple, direct, honest. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The world around them seemed to fade. Just a little. Then Lila stepped forward. "You looked sad," she said, her voice soft but certain. "And my mom says people shouldn't eat alone if they don't have to." Daniel blinked. Something shifted in his expression. Not dramatic, not obvious, but real. Slowly, he reached out and took the container. "Thank you," he said. And for the first time that night, his voice carried something other than control. Warmth. Aisha nodded once, already stepping back. "We should go," she said to Lila. But Lila didn't move right away. She looked at Daniel for another second, studying him in that quiet, fearless way only children could. Then she smiled. A small, simple smile. And just like that, something inside Daniel Brooks, something that had been silent for a long time, stirred. As Aisha turned to leave, the noise of the restaurant slowly returned. Conversations resumed. Glasses clinked. But the silence that had wrapped around Daniel earlier was gone, replaced by something else, something unfamiliar. Hope. He looked down at the container in his hands, then back at the two figures walking away. A woman who had nothing to gain, a child who saw what others ignored. And for the first time in a long time, Daniel found himself asking a question he hadn't dared to consider before. What if someone could see him and mean it? He opened the container slowly, the scent of warm food rising into the night air. And as he took his first bite, he realized something else. This night hadn't ended. It had just begun. The city looked different in the morning. Chicago didn't glow at sunrise the way it did at night. There were no golden reflections or soft jazz drifting through the air. Instead, there was noise. Real noise. The grinding of buses pulling up to stops, the rattle of trains overhead, the distant echo of sirens cutting through cold morning air. Down in South Side, the streets carried a different kind of rhythm, faster, heavier, and far less forgiving. Aisha Carter was already awake before the sun fully came up. The apartment was small. One bedroom, faded walls, a heater that clicked and groaned like it was fighting to stay alive. The kind of place where every sound traveled. Footsteps from upstairs, arguments from next door, the constant hum of a city that never truly slept. Aisha stood in the narrow kitchen, pouring cheap coffee into a chipped mug. Steam curled upward, briefly softening the sharp edges of the room. She leaned against the counter, eyes half closed, letting the warmth reach her hands before she took a sip. For a moment, everything was still. Then the clock ticked, and reality came rushing back. "Mom?" Aisha turned. Lila stood in the doorway, her hair slightly tangled from sleep, her small frame wrapped in an oversized sweater. She looked like she had something to say, but wasn't sure how. Aisha smiled, setting the mug down. "Morning, baby," she said softly. "You hungry?" Lila nodded, but her eyes stayed focused, thoughtful. "Mom, that man from last night." Aisha paused. "Of course." "He seemed sad," Lila continued. "Do you think he's okay?" Aisha reached for a pan, cracking an egg with one hand, the motion automatic. "I don't know," she said. "Some people just carry things." "What kind of things?" Aisha hesitated. "The kind you don't talk about. The kind no one asks about. The kind you don't always see," she answered quietly. Lila thought about that, then climbed onto the small chair by the table, swinging her legs gently. "You think we'll see him again?" Aisha didn't answer right away. Instead, she focused on the sound of the egg hitting the pan, the soft sizzle filling the space between them. "I doubt it," she said finally. Because people like him didn't come down here, and people like her didn't go back up there. That was just how the world worked. Breakfast was simple. One egg split between them, 2 slices of toast, a glass of milk for Lila. They ate quietly. The kind of silence that wasn't uncomfortable, just familiar. Afterward, Aisha helped Lila get ready for school. She tied her shoelaces, adjusted her backpack, and smoothed her hair with careful hands. "You feeling okay today?" Aisha asked, her voice casual, but her eyes searching. Lila nodded quickly. "Yeah." Too quickly. Aisha noticed. She always noticed. But she didn't push. Instead, she pressed a gentle kiss to Lila's forehead. "Go on. Bus is gonna be here soon." Outside, the air was colder than it had been the night before. The kind of cold that settled into your bones if you stood still too long. The bus stop was just a block away. Aisha walked Lila there, hands tucked into her coat, her eyes scanning everything out of habit. You learn to pay attention in neighborhoods like this, not out of fear, but out of necessity. A few other kids waited, their breath visible in the morning air. When the bus pulled up, Lila turned back one last time. "Mom? Yeah? If we see him again, can we say hi?" Aisha hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah," she said softly. "We can say hi." Lila smiled, then climbed onto the bus, disappearing behind the folding doors. As it drove away, Aisha stood there a moment longer than she needed to. Then she turned. Another day. Another shift. Another set of hours spent moving through spaces where she was seen, but never really noticed. By the time she reached the diner where she worked mornings, the city had fully woken up. The bell above the door chimed as she stepped inside, greeted instantly by the smell of coffee, grease, and something burnt that had been sitting too long on the stove. "Late," her manager called from behind the counter. Aisha checked the clock. 2 minutes. "Bus ran slow," she said, already tying her apron. He grunted, was unconvinced, but didn't push it. That was the thing about jobs like this. You weren't valued, but you were needed. And sometimes, that was enough to keep you from being replaced. The morning rush came fast. Orders shouted across the kitchen, plates sliding across counters, customers tapping fingers impatiently against tables. Aisha moved through it all with quiet efficiency. Refill coffee, take orders, clear plates, smile when necessary, stay invisible when not. "Hey," an older man at the counter said, snapping his fingers lightly. Aisha turned. "My eggs are cold." "I'll fix that," she replied calmly, taking the plate. No apology, no attitude, just doing what needed to be done. That was how she survived. Hours passed. By the time her shift ended, her feet ached, her shoulders burned, and her hands smelled faintly of dish soap no matter how many times she washed them. Outside, the sky had turned gray again, clouds gathering like they had something to say. Aisha pulled her coat tighter and started walking. She had a few hours before her next job. Not enough to rest, just enough to keep going. As she turned the corner onto her street, she saw him. At first, she thought she was mistaken, but then he moved slightly, adjusting the wheels of his chair, and there was no doubt. Daniel Brooks. Sitting near the edge of the sidewalk, just outside a small coffee shop that looked nothing like the place from the night before. He didn't belong here, not in the way people usually meant it. But there he was. Real. Present. And looking just as out of place as she felt in his world. Aisha slowed her steps. For a moment, she considered walking past him, pretending she hadn't seen him. That would be easier, safer. But then she remembered Lila's voice. "You looked sad." Aisha exhaled softly, then kept walking, straight toward him. Daniel looked up as she approached. Recognition flickered across his face. Then something else. Relief. "Hey," she said, her voice simple, steady. He nodded. "Hey." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The city moved around them, cars passing, people walking, life continuing like it always did. But right there on that small stretch of sidewalk, something paused. Something shifted. "You come down here often?" Aisha asked, glancing at the worn storefronts around them. Daniel gave a small, almost amused smile. "Not usually." She nodded. "Figured." Another pause. Then, without thinking too much about it, Aisha gestured toward the coffee shop. "They got decent coffee," she said. "Nothing fancy, but it'll wake you up." Daniel looked at the door, then back at her. And for the first time in a long time, he made a choice that had nothing to do with business, or control, or expectation. "Lead the way," he said. As they moved toward the entrance, neither of them noticed the subtle way people began to look. Not at Daniel, not at Aisha, but at the space between them. Two worlds. Slowly, quietly, beginning to overlap. The bell above the coffee shop door rang as Aisha pushed it open, the warm smell of roasted beans and cinnamon wrapping around them like a soft blanket. Inside, the place was small and worn, with scratched wooden tables and a chalkboard menu that hadn't been updated in weeks. As it wasn't the kind of place Daniel Brooks had ever set foot in. But he rolled in anyway. A few heads turned. Not dramatically, just enough. A glance here, a second look there. People always noticed something different, even if they didn't say it out loud. Aisha didn't react. She walked straight to the counter like she belonged there, because she did. "What you want?" she asked, glancing back at him. Daniel looked up at the menu, then back at her. "Whatever you're having." She raised an eyebrow slightly. "You sure?" He nodded. "Yeah." Aisha turned to the cashier. "2 coffees. Black." She paid without hesitation. Daniel noticed. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. Aisha shrugged, already moving toward a table near the window. "It's just coffee." But Daniel knew it wasn't. It was something else, not something simple, that people like him rarely received. They sat across from each other, the window casting a soft gray light between them. Outside, the street moved at its usual pace, people hurrying, cars passing, life continuing without pause. Inside, time slowed. "So," Aisha said, wrapping her hands around the warm cup, "you always sit on rooftops alone?" Daniel let out a quiet breath that almost turned into a laugh. "Not always," he said. "Just sometimes." She nodded, like that answer made sense. No follow-up questions, no pressure. That was new. Most people, once they realized who he was, or thought they did, wanted something. Information. Access. A story. Aisha just sat there, present. "So what brings you down here?" she asked. Daniel looked out the window for a moment, then back at her. I guess I was curious." "About what?" He hesitated, then answered honestly. "You." Aisha blinked once, surprised, but not flattered. "Why?" "Because you didn't look at me like something was wrong." But he didn't say that. Instead, he shrugged slightly. "You brought food to a stranger. That's not common." Aisha gave a small smile. "It should be." The words hung there. Simple, true, uncomplicated. Daniel leaned back slightly, studying her. Not in the way people usually did, but carefully, like he was trying to understand something he hadn't seen before. "Most people don't stop," he said. Aisha took a sip of her coffee. "Most people got too much going on," she replied. "Doesn't mean they don't care." Daniel shook his head faintly. "Or maybe they just don't want to get involved." Aisha looked at him now, really looked. "You ever try not being so sure about people?" she asked. The question caught him off guard. He wasn't used to being challenged. Not like this. Not without motive. "I've spent a long time learning how people work," he said. "And I've spent a long time proving people wrong," she replied. There was no tension in her voice, just fact. Daniel held her gaze for a moment longer than necessary. Then, slowly, something in his expression softened. "Fair enough," he said. Outside, a bus roared past, shaking the window slightly. For a while, they sat in silence again, but it wasn't the same silence as before. This one felt easier, lighter. "Lila asked about you this morning," Aisha said suddenly. Daniel's attention sharpened. "She did?" Aisha nodded. "She wanted to know if you were okay." Something in Daniel's chest tightened unexpectedly. "Tell her I'm fine," he said. "I think she'd prefer to see that for herself." He looked at her. "Yeah?" Aisha shrugged. "She's not big on taking people's word for things." Daniel smiled. A real one this time. "I'd like that," he said quietly. They finished their coffee slowly, neither in a rush to leave. When they finally stepped back outside, the air had grown colder. The clouds above hung low, heavy with the promise of rain. Aisha pulled her coat tighter. "I gotta get going," she said. "Work doesn't wait." Daniel nodded. "Yeah." He watched her for a moment, then asked, "Will I see you again?" Aisha paused, not because she didn't know the answer, but because she understood what the question really meant. Well, she looked at him, at the man in the chair, at the way he carried himself like someone who had everything, and yet somehow didn't. "If you come back," she said, "we'll be around." Simple. No promises. No expectations. Just possibility. Then she turned and walked away, disappearing into the flow of the street. Daniel stayed where he was for a moment longer, listening, watching, feeling something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Not control, not strategy. Something else. Later that afternoon, he found himself back there again. The same coffee shop, the same worn tables, the same window. He didn't tell anyone where he was going, didn't schedule it, didn't plan it. He just went. The next day he came back again, and the day after that. Each time he told himself it was coincidence, a change of scenery, and a break from routine. But deep down, he knew the truth. He was looking for something, or maybe someone. And on the fourth day, he found her. Lila. She was sitting outside on the curb, her backpack beside her, swinging her legs as she waited. When she saw him, her face lit up instantly. "You came back," she said, jumping to her feet. Daniel felt something shift again, that same quiet, unexpected warmth. "Guess I did," he replied. She walked right up to him, no hesitation, no fear. "You don't look sad today," she said, studying his face. Daniel blinked, then smiled. "I feel a little better," he admitted. She nodded like that made perfect sense. "Told you," she said. "People shouldn't eat alone." He chuckled softly. "Yeah," he said. "You did." From across the street, Aisha watched. She had just finished her shift, but her body tired, her mind already thinking about the next thing she needed to do. But for a moment, she stopped. Watching her daughter talk to a man she barely knew, watching that man, this stranger from a completely different world, listen, really listen. Something about it didn't make sense, and yet, it felt right. Still, a small part of her tightened, because life had taught her something important. Things that feel good don't always last. As she crossed the street toward them, the wind picked up, carrying the distant rumble of thunder. Storm coming. And neither of them knew. This was only the beginning. The rain came that night. Not all at once, but slowly, like the sky was deciding whether to let go or hold back just a little longer. By the time Aisha and Lila reached their apartment, the sidewalks were slick, and the streetlights shimmered in the puddles like broken glass. Inside, the apartment felt smaller than usual. The heater rattled. The pipes clicked. Somewhere down the hall, a television blared too loud, laughter from a sitcom echoing through thin walls. Aisha dropped her keys onto the counter and leaned against it for just a second longer than necessary. Her body was tired, but her mind wasn't. "You like him," Lila said from the doorway. Aisha looked up. "Who?" "That man, Daniel." Aisha let out a soft breath, almost amused. "He's just someone we met." Lila shook her head, walking into the room with quiet certainty. "He listens," she said. "Most people don't." Aisha didn't respond right away, because Lila was right, and that made it complicated. "He's different," Lila added. Aisha picked up her coat and hanging it carefully by the door. "Different doesn't always mean better," she said. But even as she said it, she wasn't sure she believed it. The next few days passed the way they always did. Work, bills, trying to stretch hours into something useful, trying to stretch money into something that could last. But something had changed. Daniel kept showing up. Not every hour, not every moment. Just enough. Sometimes outside the coffee shop. Sometimes down the block. Sometimes sitting quietly, watching the world move around him like he was trying to understand it. And every time Lila ran to him like it was the most natural thing in the world. Aisha noticed the looks. From neighbors, from strangers, from people who didn't say anything but thought plenty. She ignored them. She had learned how. But ignoring something didn't mean it didn't exist. One afternoon, the sky hung low and gray again, the kind of weather that made everything feel heavier than it already was. Aisha had just finished her shift when she saw Daniel waiting near the curb. Leela was already with him, sitting on the edge of the sidewalk, telling him a story with wide, animated gestures. Aisha slowed her steps, watched, listened. And then she said, "I couldn't run fast," Lila was saying, her voice full of energy. "But I beat her anyway." Daniel smiled. "Sounds like you proved her wrong." "I always do." Aisha stepped closer. "Hey," she said. Daniel looked up. "Hey." There was something different in his voice now. Not distant, not guarded. Just there. Aisha crossed her arms lightly. "You're making this a habit." Daniel nodded slightly. "Yeah, well, guess I am." A moment passed between them. Not uncomfortable, but not simple either. Then Lila stood up suddenly, her expression shifting. She pressed a hand lightly against her chest. Aisha saw it immediately. That small movement, that tiny hesitation in her breathing. "Lila?" Aisha said, her voice tightening. "I'm okay," Lila said quickly. Too quickly. Aisha stepped closer, crouching down in front of her. "Look at me," she said gently. Lila did. Her smile was still there, but it didn't reach her eyes. Aisha's stomach dropped. "How long?" she asked quietly. Lila didn't answer. She didn't have to. Aisha closed her eyes for a brief second, then stood up. "We're going home," she said. Daniel's expression changed instantly. "What's wrong?" Aisha hesitated, just for a second. Well, then she made a decision she didn't usually make. "She has a heart condition," she said. The words felt heavier out loud. Daniel's gaze shifted to Lila, his face tightening, not with fear, but with focus. "Is she okay?" "For now," Aisha said. "But," she stopped, because she already knew what came next. Doctor visits, bills, decisions no one should have to make. Daniel watched her carefully, then asked, "What does she need?" Aisha shook her head immediately. "No." He blinked. "I didn't." "No," she repeated, her voice firm now. "That wall. Back up, strong, unmovable." "You don't get to do that," she said. Daniel frowned slightly. "Do what?" "Step in like you can fix everything." "I'm not saying that," he replied calmly. "But you're thinking it." Silence. Heavy. Real. Aisha took a breath. "We've been handling this," she said. "We'll keep handling it." Daniel held her gaze. "You shouldn't have to do it alone." There it was. The offer. Not fully spoken, but clear. And something in Aisha snapped. Not anger. Not exactly. Something deeper. Pride. Pain. Years of being looked at like she needed saving. "We're not charity," she said quietly. The words landed harder than she intended. Daniel didn't flinch, but he felt it. "I didn't say you were." "You didn't have to." Lila looked between them, confused. "Mom." "It's okay, baby," Aisha said quickly, softening her voice. But the tension didn't disappear. It hung there, unresolved. Daniel leaned back slightly, giving space but not stepping away. "I'm just trying to help," he said. Aisha nodded once. "I know." But her tone said something else. "Not here. Not like this. Not from you." The wind picked up, carrying a chill through the street. Lila shivered slightly. Aisha reached for her hand. "We should go." Daniel watched them, not stopping them, not pushing. Just there. As they turned to leave, Lila looked back. "Bye, Daniel," she said softly. He gave a small nod. "Bye, Lila." Aisha didn't look back, didn't slow down, didn't let herself think about what just happened, because thinking about it would make it real. And real meant complicated. Behind them, Daniel sat still. The city moved around him again. Cars passing, people walking, life continuing. But something had shifted. Not broken. Not yet. But strained. He looked down at his hands, then out at the street. For the first time since meeting them, he felt something unfamiliar. Not distance, not control, but resistance. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't know how to fix it. The sky broke open just after sunset. Rain came down in sheets, slamming against rooftops, drumming on windows, turning the streets into slick rivers of reflection. Streetlights blurred into long streaks of gold, headlights cutting through the storm like knives. Inside Aisha's apartment, the world felt smaller than ever. The storm rattled the windows. The heater clanged louder than usual. Every sound seemed sharper, closer, like the walls were shrinking in around them. Lila sat at the small kitchen table, her homework spread out in front of her, pencil tapping lightly against the paper. Aisha stood at the sink, staring out at the rain. Neither of them had said much since they got home. That conversation, it lingered. Not in words, in weight. "You mad?" Lila asked quietly. Aisha blinked, turning back. "No," she said quickly. "Why would I be mad?" Lila shrugged. "You were quiet." Aisha walked over, crouching beside her. "I'm just tired, baby," she said gently. That part was true, but not the whole truth. Because tired didn't explain the tight feeling in her chest, or the way her thoughts kept circling back to Daniel, to what he offered, to what she refused. Lila nodded slowly, accepting the answer, then went back to her homework. Aisha stood there a moment longer, watching her, always watching, always checking. Then it happened, subtle at first. Lila's pencil slowed, then stopped. Her shoulders stiffened slightly. Aisha saw it immediately. "Lila?" No answer. "Lila, look at me." Lila turned. Her face was pale, too pale, her breathing shallow. "Oh, I'm okay," she whispered. But she wasn't. Aisha moved fast, faster than fear. "Come here," she said, pulling her into her arms. Lila's body felt lighter than it should. Too light. Aisha's heart started to pound. Not again. Not tonight. "Stay with me," Aisha said, her voice steady, but her hands shaking just enough to betray her. Lila tried to smile. It didn't hold. Her eyes fluttered, and then her body went limp. "Lila!" The word tore out of Aisha's chest. For a second, the world froze. No sound, no movement. Just the weight of her daughter in her arms. Then everything rushed back at once. Aisha grabbed her phone, her fingers slipping as she dialed. 911, what's your emergency? My daughter, she's not breathing right. Aisha's voice broke, but she forced it steady. She has a heart condition. But please hurry. Stay on the line, ma'am. Help is on the way. The minutes stretched. Too long, too slow. Aisha held Lila close, rocking slightly without realizing it, whispering words she didn't even hear herself saying. "It's okay. You're okay. I got you. I got you." Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, time cracked open. Sirens cut through the rain. Red lights flashing against the walls. Paramedics burst through the door, their movements quick, efficient. "Step back, ma'am." Aisha didn't want to, but she did, because she had to, because this wasn't something she could fix, not with strength, not with will. They lifted Lila onto a stretcher. Monitors, oxygen, voices calling out numbers Aisha didn't understand. "She's critical," one of them said. "We need to move now." Aisha followed, barefoot. Forgot her coat. Forgot everything. The ambulance doors slammed shut behind them. The ride was chaos. Flashing lights, sharp turns, voices overlapping. Aisha sat there, gripping Lila's hand, her world reduced to one single point. Stay. Just stay. The hospital came into view like a blur of white light. Doors opened. More voices, more movement. Then suddenly, she was alone. Just like that. The hallway stretched in front of hers, cold and sterile. The smell of disinfectant filled the air, sharp and unforgiving. Aisha stood there, her chest rising and falling too fast. A nurse approached. "Ma'am, we're doing everything we can." Everything we can. Words people said when they didn't know the outcome. "How bad is it?" Aisha asked. The nurse hesitated. "Just long enough." "She needs surgery," she said carefully. "Soon." Aisha's legs felt weak. "How much time?" "Not much." The words hit harder than anything else that night. Not much. Not enough. Never enough. Aisha sat down in one of the hard plastic chairs, her hands clasped tightly together. The storm outside faded into the background. All she could hear now was the sound of her own breathing. In, out, in, out. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time didn't make sense anymore. At some point, a doctor came out. Serious face, measured tone. "We need to operate," he said. "But we need authorization, and we need to discuss the cost." There it was. The thing no one wanted to say first. Aisha nodded slowly. "How much?" The number came, and with it, silence. Because it wasn't just a number. It was impossible. Aisha closed her eyes. For a moment she couldn't breathe. Not because of the air, because of the weight. The kind that crushed from the inside. "I'll figure it out," she said quietly. The doctor nodded, not unkind, but not hopeful either. "We don't have much time." Of course not. They never did. Aisha sat there after he left. Still. Empty. Her mind racing, searching, calculating, breaking. There was no solution, no plan, no way. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't know what to do. The hallway stretched endlessly in front of her. Cold, bright, unforgiving. And then, a familiar sound. The soft roll of wheels against tile. Aisha looked up. Daniel. He sat there at the end of the hallway, rain still clinging to his coat. His expression unreadable. He didn't speak, didn't ask, didn't explain how he knew. He just came. Aisha stared at him, too tired to be angry, too broken to push him away. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Daniel rolled forward, slowly, stopping beside her. Still no words, just presence. Real, steady, unmoving. Aisha looked down at her hands, then back at him, and for the first time since this night began, she didn't tell him to leave. The storm outside raged on, but inside that hallway, everything went quiet. Not the kind of quiet that comes from peace, the kind that settles in when there's nothing left to say. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a pale glow across the polished floor. Nurses passed by with soft, hurried steps. Monitors beeped faintly behind closed doors. Life continued all around them. But in that small stretch of hallway, time slowed. Aisha sat with her hands clasped tightly together and her elbows resting on her knees, her head slightly bowed. She wasn't crying anymore. That had passed. What remained was something heavier. Stillness. Daniel sat beside her, his wheelchair angled just slightly toward her, not intruding, but not distant either. He didn't ask questions, didn't offer solutions. He had learned over time that sometimes presence mattered more than words. Still, this was new, for both of them. Aisha let out a slow breath. "She hates hospitals," she said quietly. Daniel glanced at her. "She says they smell like fear." A faint, tired smile touched Aisha's lips, but it didn't stay long. "She always tries to be brave," she added, "even when she shouldn't have to." Daniel momotuted slightly. "She sounds strong." "She is," Aisha said. Then, and after a pause, "But she's still just a kid." The words cracked something open. Not loud, not dramatic, just enough to let the truth through. Daniel looked down the hallway, toward the closed doors that separated them from everything that mattered. "I'm sorry," he said. It wasn't a habit for him. Apologies in his world were usually calculated, strategic. This one wasn't. Aisha shook her head faintly. "For what?" "For showing up at the wrong time." Aisha looked at him then. Really looked. "You didn't," she said. Another pause. The kind that carried weight. Then she leaned back in her chair, staring up at the ceiling. "I just—" She exhaled, her voice softer now, worn thin. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do." There it was, not strength, not control. Truth. Daniel didn't respond right away, much because he understood something important in that moment. This wasn't a problem to solve. This was a moment to sit in. Still, his instincts pulled at him. Numbers, options, solutions. He knew exactly what needed to happen. He just didn't know how to say it without breaking what little trust had formed between them. So he stayed quiet. And that silence was different from the one on the rooftop. That silence had been empty. This one was shared. Minutes passed, maybe more. A nurse walked by, glancing at them briefly before continuing on. Aisha rubbed her hands together, as if trying to bring warmth back into them. "She was 5 when they found it," she said suddenly. Daniel listened. "They said it wasn't serious at first, just something to watch, but then—" She trailed off, swallowing hard. "Oh, it got worse." He nodded slowly. "And you've been handling it on your own?" Aisha let out a small, humorless laugh. "Yeah." Another pause. Daniel shifted slightly in his chair. "You shouldn't have to." The words came out before he could stop them. Aisha closed her eyes. There it was again. That line. That edge. But this time, she didn't push back. Not right away. Instead, she just sat there, breathing slowly, her shoulders rising and falling. "I know what you're thinking," she said after a moment. Daniel didn't answer. "You think this is something you can fix," she continued. Her voice wasn't sharp this time, just tired. "You think money makes it easier." Daniel met her gaze. "It does make it easier," he said. Honest, direct. Aisha studied him, not judging, not rejecting, just considering. For who?" she asked. The question hung there, because it wasn't about the surgery. It was about everything around it. Pride, power, control. Daniel didn't answer, because for the first time, he didn't have one. The hallway stretched on in front of them, long and quiet. Then, footsteps. A doctor approached. Both of them straightened slightly. Hope. Fear. All at once. "She's stable for now," the doctor said. Aisha exhaled, her body sagging just a little. "But we need to move quickly," he added. Of course, always that second part. "We're preparing for surgery," he continued. "We'll need authorization soon." Aisha nodded. "I understand." The doctor gave her a brief, sympathetic look, then walked away. And just like that, the weight returned. Stronger, heavier. Daniel watched her, and watched the way she held herself together with nothing but will, watched the way her hands trembled just slightly when she thought no one was looking. And something inside him shifted. Not strategy, not obligation, something deeper. He looked down at the floor, then back at her. "Aisha," he said quietly. She didn't look up, but she heard him. "You don't have to do this alone." There it was, again. But different this time. Softer. Less force. More offering. Aisha closed her eyes. For a long moment she said nothing, because saying something would mean choosing, and she wasn't ready for that. Not yet. Not like this. So instead, she did something unexpected. She reached out. Not far. Just enough. Her hand brushed lightly against his. Not a grip, not a hold. Just contact. Real, human. Daniel froze for a second. Not because of discomfort. Because of what it meant. Trust. Not fully given. But not denied either. And in that quiet hallway, with the storm still raging somewhere beyond the walls, two people who had every reason to stay apart, sat side by side, not solving anything, not fixing anything, just staying. And somehow, that mattered more than either of them could say. The night stretched longer than it should have. Hospitals had a way of bending time, turning hours into something unrecognizable. The clock on the wall ticked forward, but it didn't feel real. Everything lived in between hope and fear, between waiting and knowing. Aisha didn't sleep. She couldn't. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Lila's face going pale, felt the weight of her small body going still in her arms, and so she stayed awake, counting breaths, counting seconds, holding on to something she couldn't control. Daniel stayed too, not because he had to, because he chose to. At some point, a nurse brought coffee. It was bitter, lukewarm, but Aisha took it anyway, her hand wrapping around the cup like it was something solid in a world that wasn't. "You should get some rest," she said at one point, her voice quiet. Daniel shook his head. "I'm fine." She didn't argue, because she knew that look, the one that said leaving wasn't an option. The storm outside had passed by early morning. In its place came a dull gray light that filtered through the windows, soft and tired. The kind of light that didn't promise anything. A doctor passed them once, then twice. Each time Aisha's body tensed, each time nothing, until finally, a nurse approached. "They're prepping her now," she said gently. "Surgery will start soon." Aisha nodded. Her throat felt dry. "How long?" "A few hours." A few hours. It sounded simple. It wasn't. Can I see her? Aisha asked. The nurse hesitated, then nodded. For a moment. Aisha stood up slowly. Her legs felt weak, like they didn't quite belong to her anymore. She looked at Daniel. He gave a small nod. I'll be right here. She didn't thank him. Didn't need to. Then she walked down the hallway, disappearing behind a set of double doors. Daniel sat alone. For the first time since he arrived. The hallway felt different without her. Quieter. Colder. He looked down at his hands, then reached into his coat pocket, pulling out his phone. He stared at it for a long moment. Yet this was the part he understood. The part he had spent his entire life mastering. Decisions, resources, power. He tapped a number. It rang once, twice, then, Mr. Brooks? The voice on the other end was calm, professional. I need you to handle something, Daniel said. Of course. There's a patient at St. Mary's, pediatric. I want the full cost of her surgery covered. A brief pause. Understood. Should I have the foundation? No, Daniel interrupted. Not like that, not public, not branded. Handle it quietly. Another pause. Consider it done. Daniel ended the call. No hesitation, no second thought. For him, it was simple. But this wasn't about money. Not really. It was about what came after. Aisha returned a few minutes later. Her eyes were red, but she wasn't crying. Not anymore. Oh, she asked for you, she said. Daniel looked up. For me? Aisha nodded. She said, she wanted to know if you were still here. Something in his chest shifted. I am, he said. Aisha sat down again, exhaling slowly. They're starting soon. He nodded. And just like that, they were back in it. Waiting. Time passed. The hallway filled, then emptied, then filled again. Doctors moved in and out. Machines beeped. The world continued. But for them, everything narrowed down to one single door. Then, hours later, a doctor stepped out. Both of them stood up instantly. How is she? Aisha asked. The doctor removed his gloves, his expression measured, but not grim. The surgery went well, he said. The words landed, soft, then heavy. Aisha's knees almost gave out. Daniel reached forward slightly, but stopped himself. Oh, she's stable, the doctor continued. We'll monitor her closely, but she's going to be okay. Aisha covered her mouth, a breath escaping her like something she had been holding for too long. Relief real. Overwhelming. Daniel exhaled slowly, his shoulders lowering just a fraction. She's asking for you, the doctor added gently. Aisha nodded quickly. Thank you, she said, her voice breaking now. She turned toward the doors, then stopped, because there was something else, something unfinished. The paperwork, she said, turning back. I still need to. The doctor hesitated, then shook his head slightly. That's already been taken care of. Aisha blinked. What? The billing, he clarified. It's been handled. Silence. Confusion. That doesn't make sense, she said. The doctor gave a small, polite smile. It happens sometimes. No explanation, no detail, just fact. Aisha looked at Daniel, slowly, carefully. He didn't move, didn't speak, but his eyes told her everything. You did this, she said quietly. Not a question, a statement. Daniel met her gaze. I made a call, he said. Aisha stared at him. The hallway seemed to close in around them again. Not with fear this time, with something else. something harder to name. "I told you," she started. "I know what you told me," Daniel said gently. She shook her head. "I said we're not—" "You're not Charity," he finished. Silence. Heavy. Then, "I didn't do this because you needed help," he said. Aisha looked at him. "Then why?" Daniel held her gaze. "Because she deserved a chance," he said. Simple. Clear. Unshaken. Aisha felt something shift inside her. Not anger. Not pride. Something deeper. Something that made it harder to argue. Harder to walk away. Because this wasn't about her anymore. This was about Lila. And the truth was, without this, there might not have been a tomorrow. Aisha looked down, then back at him, her voice softer now. "You don't even know us." Daniel shook his head. "No," he said. Then, after a pause, "But you didn't know me either." The words hung there, bringing everything back. The rooftop, the food, the moment that started it all. Aisha exhaled slowly. Her shoulders dropped. Not in defeat, in something else. Understanding. Not complete. Not easy. But real. "I need to see her," she said finally. Daniel nodded. "Go." She turned and walked toward the doors. This time, not alone. Daniel stayed where he was, watching, waiting. And for the first time in a long time, he wasn't wondering if he had done the right thing. He was wondering what would happen next. The question lingered in the air like a shadow that refused to fade. Outside, the city moved as it always did. Cars sliding through intersections, people rushing past glass doors, the low hum of life continuing without pause. But inside the quiet room, time seemed to slow, stretching each second into something heavier. He stood by the window, fingers resting lightly against the cool surface of the glass. From this height, everything looked smaller. Problems, people, even consequences. But he knew better than to trust distance. Some things didn't shrink no matter how far away you stood. Behind him, the faint sound of movement broke the silence. She hadn't said anything yet, and somehow, that silence said more than words ever could. He turned slowly, not all at once, as if giving the moment time to settle before facing it fully. She was still there, exactly where he had left her, standing near the edge of the room, shoulders slightly tense, eyes searching his face like she was trying to read something that hadn't been spoken yet. There was no fear in her expression, just uncertainty, and something else, something quieter. "Why?" she finally asked. The word was soft, almost careful, but it landed heavier than anything louder could have. It wasn't accusation. It wasn't anger. It was genuine. He took a breath, longer than he needed, as if searching for an answer that could hold everything the moment demanded. But the truth was, there wasn't a simple one. "Because no one else did," he said, and her brows pulled together slightly, not in confusion, but in thought. "That's not really an answer." He gave a faint, almost tired smile. "I know." The light shifted through the window, casting long, quiet lines across the floor between them. It felt like a distance, even though they stood only a few steps apart. She moved first. Not quickly, not dramatically. Just a small step forward, enough to close part of the space but not all of it. "You didn't have to," she said. "No," he agreed. Another silence followed. But this one was different. It wasn't empty. It was full. Of everything neither of them knew how to say yet. He watched her carefully now, noticing the details he hadn't before. The way she held herself, not defensive, not guarded, but cautious. The way her eyes didn't avoid his, even when the moment grew heavier. The way she seemed steady, stronger than she looked, stronger than anyone had probably given her credit for. "You still don't understand, do you?" he said quietly. She shook her head. "Then explain it." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't demand. It simply asked. And somehow, that made it harder. He turned slightly, glancing back out at the city for just a second, like he needed something to anchor himself before continuing. "Sometimes," he said slowly, "you don't step in because it's your responsibility." He paused. "You do it because you're the only one who sees what's about to happen if you don't." She didn't interrupt, didn't look away. And for the first time, something in her expression softened, not with understanding, not completely, but with the beginning of it. "So this," she gestured faintly around them, "to the situation, to everything that had led here. This changes things, doesn't it?" He hesitated, because the answer to that question wasn't simple either. "Yes," he said. Her eyes flickered just for a moment. "Then what happens now?" There it was again. The question he hadn't been able to stop thinking about. He exhaled slowly, letting the weight of it settle instead of pushing it away. "Now," he said, "everything starts moving." She let out a small breath, almost a laugh, but without humor. "That doesn't sound very reassuring." "It's not supposed to be." Another step. Now they were close enough that the distance didn't feel like distance anymore. Just space. Shared space. "You're not afraid?" she asked. He looked at her directly. "Of what?" "Of what comes next." For a moment he didn't answer. Well, because the truth was complicated. Because fear wasn't the right word. And neither was confidence. "It's not about being afraid," he said finally. "It's about knowing there's no going back." That seemed to land. She nodded slowly, her gaze dropping for just a second before lifting again. "And you're okay with that?" He didn't respond right away. Instead, he studied her, really studied her, like he was trying to understand something that had only just begun to reveal itself. Then, quietly, "I am now." Something shifted between them then. Not dramatic, not sudden, but real. Like a door had opened just enough for light to slip through. Outside, the world kept moving. Inside, something had changed, and neither of them could pretend it hadn't. Because whatever came next, it wasn't just about what had already happened. It was about what they were going to face together. And for the first time since everything began, that possibility didn't feel uncertain. It felt inevitable. And that was exactly what made it dangerous. The air in the room changed, not colder, not warmer, but sharper, like something invisible had just drawn a line neither of them could step back across. He noticed it first, not in the silence, but in the way she stood. A moment ago she had been uncertain, questioning, searching. Now there was something else in her posture. Not fear, not hesitation. Resolve. It was quiet, but it was there. "You said everything starts moving," she said, her voice steady now. "So where does it start?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked past her, slow, deliberate steps, toward the table near the center of the room. A folder sat there. Plain, unremarkable, but nothing about this moment was simple. He opened it. Inside, a set of documents, clean, precise, undeniable. He slid them across the table without a word. She hesitated for only a second before stepping forward and picking them up. Her eyes moved quickly at first, then slowed, then stopped. "What is this?" "You tell me." Her gaze scanned the first page again, slower this time, like she was making sure she hadn't misunderstood. Her fingers tightened slightly around the edges of the paper. This can't be right. It is. She looked up at him, something sharper in her eyes now. No, she said, shaking her head. If this is real, then everything they said, everything they built this on, was never solid to begin with, he finished. The words settled heavily between them. She looked back down at the documents, flipping to the next page, then the next, each one telling the same story, each one tearing something apart, piece by piece. Why didn't anyone say anything? She whispered. They didn't know, he said. And you did? He didn't respond right away, because the answer wasn't simple. I knew something didn't add up, he said finally. This just proves it. Her hands lowered slowly, the papers now hanging loosely at her side. For a moment she didn't speak, didn't move, didn't even seem to breathe. Then, they're not going to let this go. It wasn't a question. It was a fact. He nodded once. I know. Her eyes lifted again, meeting his directly. And you still brought me into this? There it was. The edge. Not anger, but something close to it. But not directed at him, but at the situation. At the realization. At some point, he said quietly, you were already in it. She let out a breath, slow, controlled, but it didn't hide the tension building beneath it. That's not the same as choosing it. No, he agreed. It's not. Another silence, but this one carried weight, choice. That was what this came down to now, not what had already happened, but what she would do next. He didn't push, didn't fill the space, he just waited. Because whatever she decided, it had to be hers. She looked down at the papers one more time. Then, carefully, almost deliberately, she placed them back on the table, not dropping them, not pushing them away, setting them down. Like she understood exactly what they meant, and what they would cost. When she looked back at him, yet the uncertainty was gone, completely. They built everything on a lie, she said. He didn't interrupt. They made people believe something that wasn't true, she continued. And they kept it going because no one challenged it. Her voice didn't rise, but it grew stronger. And now you're telling me we can prove it? Yes. A pause, then. That changes everything. It does. Another breath. But this one was different. Not heavy, not uncertain, decided. So what's the first move? She asked. He studied her for a moment, not questioning, not doubting, but recognizing something. She had crossed the line, the one he couldn't cross for her, and now there was no going back. We don't rush, he said. That's what they'll expect. She nodded. We gather everything, every record, every gap, and every piece they thought no one would connect. And then? He stepped closer, just enough for his voice to lower without losing its clarity. Then we make sure when it comes out, it doesn't leave them any room to deny it. Her eyes didn't waver. Public? Eventually. A faint shift in her expression, understanding the scale now, the risk, the impact. They'll come after us before that, she said. They'll try. And you're okay with that? He held her gaze. I told you, there's no going back. She let that settle. Then, almost quietly, good. It was a simple word, but it carried something stronger than anything she had said before. Not hesitation, not fear, commitment. Outside, the city continued like nothing had changed, but inside that room, everything had. Because now it wasn't just a possibility anymore. It wasn't just an idea. It was a plan, and more importantly, it was shared. Two people, one truth, and a system built on something that was about to collapse, not because it was attacked, but because, finally, someone had chosen to expose it. And this time, no one was going to look away. That was the plan. But plans, he knew, rarely survived their first real test. The first sign came sooner than either of them expected. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was subtle. Too subtle. A phone call that didn't go through. An email that bounced back without explanation. A name. One of the key contacts they had planned to meet. Suddenly unavailable, with no reason given. At first, it could have been coincidence. But by the third time, it wasn't anymore. "They know," she said quietly. They were back in the same room. Oh, but it felt different now. The space that had once held uncertainty now carried tension, tight, controlled, waiting for something to snap. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he picked up his phone again, scrolling through the call log, replaying the pattern in his mind. 3 attempts, 3 failures, too clean to be random. "They don't know everything," he said finally, "but they know enough." She crossed her arms not defensively, but to hold herself steady. "That means they're watching." "Yes." The word landed flat, certain, unavoidable. She let out a breath, slower this time. "Then we don't have as much time as we thought." "No," he agreed. "We don't." The shift was immediate. This wasn't about preparation anymore. This was about pressure, and pressure changed everything. She moved to the table again. But this time her actions were sharper, more deliberate. She picked up the documents, flipping through them faster now, not searching for understanding, but for strategy. "What's the weakest point?" she asked. He watched her for a second, not surprised, but recognizing the difference. Before, she had been reacting. Now she was thinking ahead. "They've built layers," he said, "on purpose, so nothing leads directly back." "But there's always a connection," she said. "Yes. Then we find it." Her certainty didn't sound forced. It sounded earned. He nodded slightly. "We already have part of it." He reached for another file, one he hadn't shown her yet. Thinner, but heavier in a different way. He placed it in front of her. "This is where it starts to break." She opened it carefully. Inside, fewer pages, but more precise. Most transactions, dates, names that appeared where they shouldn't, and one name that appeared too often. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "This person," she tapped the page to. "They show up in everything." He nodded. "They're the link." She looked up. "Then why haven't they been exposed already?" "Because no one was looking at all the pieces together." That answer settled something. Not comfort, but clarity. She closed the file slowly. "If we bring this forward now, it won't be enough." "No. They'll deny it." "Yes. And they'll bury it before it spreads." He didn't argue. Because she was right. That was exactly what would happen. "So we don't bring it forward yet," she said. He watched her carefully now, because this was the moment where decisions mattered. "Then what do we do?" he asked. Her gaze shifted, not away, but inward, like she was mapping something out in real time. "We make it impossible to ignore." The words were quiet, but precise. "How?" he asked. She took a step closer to the table, placing both hands on its surface, grounding herself in the thought. "We don't just show the connection," she said. "We show the impact." He didn't interrupt. People don't react to documents, she continued. They react to what those documents mean. A pause, then. We find who's been affected. That changed the room. Because that wasn't just strategy. That was exposure. Real, human, unavoidable. They won't like that, he said. They don't have to. Another pause, this one sharper. They'll try to stop us before we get that far, he added. She looked at him again, and this time, there was no hesitation at all. Then we move faster than they expect. The shift was complete. There was no more uncertainty in her voice, no more waiting, just direction. He nodded once, not because he was leading anymore, but because they were aligned. All right, he said. Then we start tonight. Her expression didn't change, but something in her eyes did. Focus. Where? She asked. He glanced at the file again, then back at her. There's a place for Sihuo, he said. It's not on any official list, but it should be. And that's where we'll find them? Some of them. That's enough. Silence again, but not the same kind. This silence wasn't heavy. It was sharp, like the moment before movement. She picked up her jacket. No hesitation, no second thought. You ready? She asked. He looked at her for a second, not questioning. Oh, just measuring the moment. Then, yes. They moved toward the door together, not as two people reacting to something that had already happened, but as two people stepping into what came next. And for the first time since all of this began, they weren't trying to catch up to the truth. They were moving ahead of it. Outside, the night had settled in. Lights flickered across the city. Cars moved slower now, quieter. But the world hadn't stopped. It never did. They stepped out into it anyway, because whatever was coming, it wasn't waiting, and neither were they. The city looked different at night. Not quieter, just more honest. The polished surfaces faded. The distractions dimmed. What remained were the parts people didn't advertise. The edges. The spaces between things. That's where they were headed. While he drove without rushing, but with purpose. The road stretched ahead in long lines of light and shadow, street lamps flickering across the windshield in steady rhythm. Beside him, she didn't speak, not because there was nothing to say, but because they both understood this part didn't need words. You've been here before, she said after a while. It wasn't a question. He nodded once, eyes still on the road. A long time ago. And you didn't come back? No. She turned slightly, studying him now. Why? He took a breath. Because the answer mattered. Because I didn't want to see what I already knew was there. That sat between them. Not heavy, just real. And now? She asked. Now it matters more that we see it. The car slowed as they turned off the main road. The lights changed immediately. On brighter streets gave way to dimmer ones. Wide lanes narrowed. Buildings shifted from glass to brick, from polished to worn. The kind of place people passed through, but didn't stay. He pulled the car to a stop. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then she looked out the window. This is it? This is where it starts. She nodded, not hesitating, and reached for the door. The air outside was cooler, sharper. It carried a different kind of silence, not empty, but watchful. They walked side by side, not too close, not too far apart. The building ahead didn't stand out. No sign, no clear indication of what it held, which was exactly the point. He pushed the door open. Inside, the light was low but steady. A narrow hallway stretched ahead, lined with doors that looked identical at first glance, but weren't. And each one carried its own story. Some closed, some slightly open, all quiet. She slowed her pace, taking it in. "This place," she said softly. "It's where things fall through," he finished. Her eyes moved across the space, noticing details others might miss. The worn edges of the floor, the faint marks on the walls, the way everything felt used but not cared for. "People come here when something goes wrong," she said. "And no one fixes it," he replied. A voice echoed faintly from deeper inside, not loud, but enough. They followed it, step by step, until the hallway opened into a wider room. There were people there, not many, but enough to tell a story. Some sitting, some standing, all waiting. Waiting for something, or someone. The moment they stepped in, a few heads turned. Not suspicious, just aware. But he stopped. So did she. And for the first time since they left, there was hesitation. Not fear, but recognition. This wasn't just information anymore. This was real. "These are the people," she said quietly. "Yes." Her eyes moved from one face to another. Different ages, different stories. But something the same in all of them. Something that matched the documents. "This is what they didn't want anyone to see." He nodded. A man near the far wall looked up, noticing them more closely now. There was no hostility in his gaze, just caution, the kind that comes from experience. "You're not from around here," the man said. His voice was steady, careful. "No," he replied. The man studied him for a moment longer. Then his eyes shifted to her. "And you brought her." It wasn't judgment, it was observation. "Oh, she needed to see it," he said. The man considered that, then nodded once. "Most people don't come back after the first time." "I didn't," he admitted. "But you're here now." "Yes." A pause. Then the man stepped forward slightly. "Then you know what this place means." He didn't look away. "I do." The man's gaze softened, not with trust, not fully, but with something close to it. "And what are you planning to do about it?" That was the question. The one that changed everything. He didn't answer right away, because this time it wasn't just his answer to give. He glanced at her, just for a second. But it was enough. She stepped forward, not dramatically, not loudly, but clearly. "We're going to show it," she said. The room didn't react all at once, but something shifted. A few people straightened. Others looked up. Not hope, not yet, but attention. "Show what?" the man asked. She held his gaze. "All of it." Another silence, but this one carried something new. Risk. Because once something is seen, it can't be unseen. "They've been hiding this for a long time," the man said. "We know," she replied. "And you think people will care?" That question lingered, because it mattered, more than anything else. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked around the room, at the faces, at the quiet stories waiting to be heard, then back at him. "They will," she said. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Because this time, it wasn't uncertainty speaking. It was belief. And for the first time, someone else in the room seemed to feel it too. If this moment hit you, even a little, I want to hear from you. Oh, just drop a simple 1 in the comments if you believe the truth should always come out, no matter how long it's been hidden. Or comment 0 if you think some truths are better left buried. No long message needed. Just a number. And if you've ever seen something like this in real life, something people chose to ignore. You can share that too. I read every single comment. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because the next story, it might be even closer to reality than you expect. And trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next.